This is Richard Gilkey. He was born on March 6, 1949. He served in the Vietnam War in the Army branch. His highest ranked was E5 Spec 5. The interview is being recorded in Davis, California on November 28, 2015. The interviewer is Sydney Krish-Liftenham. Present is Julia Wright, Nico Vives, Jonathan Callanan. This interview is being conducted for the Veteran History Project at the Library of Congress. Where were you born?
I was born in Barberton, Ohio,
When were you born?
March 6, 1949, about 4 a.m. in the morning.
What was your parents' occupation? Oh no.
Occupation.
Thank you. Occupation.
At the time, my father worked in a factory in Ohio, and my mom was the housekeeper.
Do you have any sisters or brothers?
I have 2 sisters and 1 brother.
What are their names?
Randy, who's the youngest, Darlene's the next. Diane is the closest to me. She's 2 years younger than me.
Before you entered service, what were you doing?
I had graduated from high school and I had a full-time job at a chicken farm in Fremont, California.
Did any other of your family members enter the military with you?
No.
What influenced your decision to join the Army?
The draft. My draft number was coming up, and if you get drafted, there was a good chance you became infantry, or as we called them, grunts. And I would rather choose MOS, military occupational specialty, and avoid being a grunt walking through the jungles in some country I'd never heard of.
How did you enter the service?
How did I enter it? Drove to Oakland.
Did you take part in any training camps?
Of course, the military always sends you to the school's 4-year MOS, and I became a fixed-wing airplane mechanic.
What was that like?
It was interesting. It was something new for me, and aviation always piqued my interest, so it was a lot of fun.
Did you make any friends while you were there?
I got real sick during my time in Alabama, and I ended up being recycled into a class that was about a month behind me. And I met Alan Lee, a kid from Montana that was a nut and hilarious and just a lot of fun to be around.
Do you still keep in touch with them today?
I reconnected with him last year.
How long were you in the training camp for?
I was in Alabama for about 5 to 6 months. I don't really recall.
What specific branch for the training camp? Were there specific branches in the training camps?
No, it was Fort Rucker, Alabama, and it was the aviation school. They taught all aspects of aviation, from pilots to door gunners to mechanics.
What was the early days of training camp like?
Well, it was just joining the service was a little scary to begin with. You don't know what to expect. It makes you grow up real fast, and you've got people yelling and screaming at you all the time. I started becoming what they called a STRAC troop. I was meticulous, which I've pretty much been my whole life. Everything, spit shine boots, perfectly pressed fatigues, and I took over marching the class every morning to the school, from the barracks to the school.
As the training camps went on, do you feel like you grew as a person?
Oh, most definitely, yeah. The Army was takes you from being a young punk kid to it beats you down. You learn respect.
In what ways?
Well, when you got somebody, rank's very important in the military, and when you have somebody, you're a private E-nothing, and you got some guy with one stripe on his arm yelling and screaming at you, and your first days of going in the Army, you're petrified of this guy, just to discover about a month later when you get your first stripe that he's nothing. So anybody who had more stripes on their sleeves had more authority than you and could tell you what to do.
How did you earn the stripes?
Just by being a really good soldier and doing what they expected of me.
Did you earn any stripes?
Yeah, well, E5. I went through the rank pretty quick. I was actually up for E6, and that required me to re-enlist in the Army, which I elected not to do.
Why?
I had a love-hate relationship with the military. When I was in it, I hated it. When I was out of it, I wanted to be back in it again.
Was it hard to adapt to the military life?
From day one, when they put you in what was called and what actually wasn't day one, it was probably about your 6th day in basic training, and they put you into what they called a cattle car, just like they'd stick cows in, and they drive you out to your barracks, and some guy's yelling and screaming at you the whole way there, and the minute you get off, you're getting yelled and screamed at. They asked you to do ridiculous things during basic training, things that made no sense at all. But they had the rank and you had to do what they said, so it was an eye-opener.
What were some of the ridiculous things that you guys had to do?
We were getting ready to go on our night march, which was a forced march, they called it, 20 miles. And they made us all stand. We were in combat gear with our helmets on. And the helmets are a two-part. You have a liner, a fiberglass liner, and then you have a steel pot that went over it. And they made us separate the liner and put the liner at our feet and then hold the steel pot up high over our heads. And when they yelled attention, you had to drop the helmet on your head. And they did that to us about 5 or 6 times until one of the guys in the company, the helmet came down on his nose and split his nose open, and then they decided maybe they'd better stop. By then we all had horrible headaches.
Do you feel like the men that you were with during this, do you feel like you get a big connection with them?
You become connected with most of the guys. One of the things that's a real learning experience is that you, as an example, you grow up with your friends at school and your family and the neighborhood and the community, and then you go in the military and all of a sudden you're mixed with people from all over this country. And trust me, the people act a lot different from other states, especially on the East Coast. And so you're dealing with different personalities and different ways of life. They were raised different than you, and you're kind of getting force-fed all of this information very quickly, and it can be difficult.
Is it hard to be around so many different kinds of people?
In some cases, personality clashes was a big problem. I had a couple times I had several clashes with other races, to where we were nose to nose screaming at each other. And I don't remember what was said, but I said something right, and all of a sudden we were friends. So it could change that quick. And when we get to talking about Vietnam, I had an experience with a New Yorker that was a real eye-opener.
What was that like, going from being so mad at someone to just being friends?
It was rewarding because we were trying to accomplish a major task in basic training, and he was the opposition. I was trying to organize it, and that's actually when I realized that I was more of a leader than a follower, because I just took charge. And him and his group, which basically consisted of the guys that didn't like doing anything, were refusing to do the cleaning that we had to do.
How did the tension at the war affect the relationships with the other soldiers?
We were all concerned, of course, when we went in the service, and we knew we were going to specific schools, and each one of us were maybe going in different directions when we got out of basic training. And of course, there was always in our minds about going to Vietnam. That's another reason why I also enlisted, was I was hoping I could avoid Vietnam.
When you first joined in the war, did anyone you know from like your hometown or like close friends go with you?
When I joined the Army, I went in on the buddy plan. One of my high school buddies went in with me, but when we graduated from basic training and we went to Alabama, that's where we separated, because he went in a different direction for his career than what I had taken. The young Montana kid that I talked about, we chased each other all over the world, and it makes you, there's a lot of situations where you realize that the earth is really pretty small. You know, you sit down in Germany to breakfast your first day in Germany, and you sit down and you look over at the guy next to you and you discover that it's Carlos from high school, and you're kind of like, whoa, you know.
So where were some of the places you traveled during the wartime?
Of course, stateside, I was in Alabama, and I got to see the southern part of our country, which wasn't very impressive at the time. It's changed a lot since then, thank goodness. And then I went to, when I came out of school, I had orders for Germany, which was the relief kind of, but by then being the STRAC troop that I was becoming what they termed gung-ho. And Germany sounded fun, but I was getting to the point I wanted to go to Vietnam.
Why?
See action. I wanted to be part of it. And I can't tell you why. It was just in my head. And of course, the crazy kid from Montana was right there pushing me also, because that's what he wanted to do.
Where did you serve?
I served, when I was in Germany, I served just outside Frankfurt. When I was sent there, I was sent to an engineer company, which really upset me because they didn't have any airplanes. And I happened to mention that I knew how to type a little bit, and the next thing I knew, I was the clerk typist in the supply room. And so I was pretty upset, and Alan was pretty upset because he went in a different direction with the engineers, and we both requested transfers to 66th Aviation Company, which was in Frankfurt. And after about 40 days after we submitted our transfer, it came back approved, and we actually got to go to an aviation company.
How did it feel to get it approved?
Oh, it was quite a relief, because that meant I got to go work on airplanes. And but then when we got to 66, they only had like a dozen planes, and they had like 30 guys that wanted to be crew chiefs, that wanted their own plane. And so that was a major disappointment, because that meant I was going to be stuck in the hangar with a wrench in my hand fixing planes and not having my own plane or being a crew chief of one of the planes.
During your trips abroad, can you give us some of the details of like some of the favorite things you saw, some of the things that like stick in your mind the most?
Germany was a lot of fun. At first it was a little scary, because the German people, they don't much care for Americans. They really don't like GIs, so that was a big problem. When we were lost a couple times and didn't know what to do, or of course didn't speak German, and you try and talk to them, they would get nasty with you, or they'd ignore you or just walk away. So that was a real scary part. Part of growing up is you arrive in Germany on a plane. I'm all excited about being in Europe and seeing a foreign country, and I'm taken to a barracks in Frankfurt that's an old German barracks. And you drive through a steel gate and you get out of the bus and you're surrounded by four sides of 5-story building and you can't see anything. All you saw was this building. And even when we got inside the building, it had small oval windows that we could look out, and all I saw was filth and train tracks. So I wasn't getting to enjoy Germany. I was pretty upset about that. And then about my third day there, they give me my orders for this engineer company and shove you out the gate. You're on your own. You got to go find the train station. You don't speak the language. People aren't talking to you. You have to go exchange your U.S. currency for German marks. And finally you get on the train and you get to where you think you're supposed to be, and you get off the train and there's nobody there to greet you. So you end up, it's February, into February, it's freezing cold. You end up spending the night at this train station, no food, no cover, no place to get warm. And we had figured we'd all made a mistake, and what were we going to do? Once again, ask the Germans, no results. You know, they just were verdammt Americans. They didn't want to talk to us. Fortunately, the next morning, a truck showed up to pick us up and took us to the engineer company. But it was a scary night. You know, I'm stuck in Germany. I don't speak the language, and so that was the part I think that matured me the most, because you have to learn how to be independent and how to survive on your own.
How long were you in Germany?
I was there for almost 10 months.
Did you ever go back to Germany after you came home?
No, I'd always thought about it. There were some places that I visited there, even downtown Frankfurt. There was a little bar/restaurant, really small place that go in and drink apple wine, and the food was just fabulous. And I'd always thought that would be really kind of cool to go back and do that all over again.
What were some of the battles? Did you serve in any battles during?
Germany, no. Against the Germans, maybe, because they were never that friendly. But my time in Frankfurt, Alan and I we were both really straight troops, strack troops, and so they gave us a pass, which we got to put in our wallet all the time. The minute we got off work, we went outside the gate, got on their metro system, and went downtown Frankfurt, and we'd go to a youth hostel to meet girls. And we'd meet girls from all over the world.
Was it fun being able to meet all these different kinds of people?
It was. It was also kind of an eye-opener. One time we sat down at a table with some young college girls from Britain, and when they found out that we were Army service people, they told us to get lost because they were part of the protesters. They didn't want to talk to us.
What was that like?
That was my first taste of dealing with people that didn't like me because of what I was doing.
Were there other times that you felt that also?
Oh, yes.
What were some of those times?
When I came, I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And when the orders came through, Alan and I both volunteered. His came through approved, mine came denied. And the company commander told me I was too valuable to the company, and he had never even forwarded my request to the higher level. He just stuck it in a file and said no. So I told him that, I says, then do it again. And I says, and I'll keep asking you to do it again until I get approval. And so I guess he realized that I was pretty serious about it. And after another 30 days, it was finally approved. And of course, the Army was happy to send me to Vietnam. And when I came home, I wanted to surprise my parents. They lived in San Jose, and that was really important to me. But I got a big mouth, and I knew it was going to be difficult. So I managed to get on the plane from Frankfurt to New York, and I remember sitting in the seat of the plane going, wow, I made it this far. I didn't call them yet. And then I knew I was going to have problems when I got to New York. And yet I managed to get on the flight to San Francisco, and I was relieved again that, I didn't call them. And so I got off the plane, I went into a restroom, I made sure my uniform was perfect and everything was exactly perfect. And I walked out, and some guy, hippie, long-haired guy, walking through the terminal, deliberately ran into me and almost knocked me down and called me scum. And at first it shocked me, and I turned around and I looked at him like, why? What did I do to deserve that? I mean, I knew there was protesting, but I had never, I hadn't experienced it other than these girls in Germany. And I walked a little ways farther, and two hippie couples come running up in front of me. And they were calling me baby killer and warmonger and F this and F that and cussing and getting in my face. And I stepped back like, wow, I looked at them and I says, I haven't even been to Vietnam. And they just kept with their bashing me. And this one young girl got up, and she was just right in front of me, screaming. And she spit up the side of my cheek and my shirt and my left shoulder. And for me, that was really difficult, because spitting on someone, to me, was one of the worst offenses you could do. And so I shoved her. And of course, the hippies were coming, all of them coming after me at that point. Fortunately, there were two MPs close by, and they came over and pulled me away from the group. And I thought I was going to be in trouble, and they just walked me away and told me to get into civilian clothes. So that set the tide for me. That made me deathly afraid to be in the public in uniform. So after my leave, when I went back to San Francisco Airport to fly to Seattle, I went in civilian clothes. There was no way I was going in the public in uniform. And even when I was discharged, we landed at Travis, we were bused to Oakland, and it took like 8 hours to process me out of the Army. And they went to measure me for a dress uniform, and I said, I'm not leaving here in a dress uniform, forget it. And I wanted to surprise my parents again. So they said, everybody that leaves the base has to be in a dress uniform. That's code. That's the way it is. Just suck it up and accept it. So that made me realize that I wasn't going to be able to surprise my parents. I went to a phone and called them, told them to come and pick me up. And fortunately, they were able to drive on the base. I walked out the door, got in the car, and never went in the public in uniform again.
What was it like with all the mistreatment?
A lot of guys experienced different things. Some guys didn't experience anything at all. A few of us went through what I went through. We still talk about it on Facebook quite a bit, about what would happen to us. And it changed the tide in the country with the last few generations for our present troops, that they not be received the way we were. There are a lot of people, and it's funny because it's younger people, that want to say thank you for your service or welcome home. For me, welcome home's too late. Too little, too late. I don't want to hear that. Thank you for your service. I accept that. There's a lot of guys that don't accept any of this. They're still really bitter. I am still extremely bitter about the protesters, the draft dodgers, the guys that burnt their draft card, the guys that went to Canada that Ford pardoned. That's a real thorn for me. Jane Fonda, huge thorn.
What was it like seeing the people who just avoided the draft altogether?
I tried to avoid them when I got out of the service. I didn't want to be around them. And like I said, to have somebody come up and say, welcome home, it's a younger generation. And to me, it means more when it's my generation that's coming up and saying something they should have said 45 years ago. And it has more validity. And a woman did that on Veterans Day this year. And she was about my age, and she came up and thanked me for my service and made me feel real good. You know, I felt a lot different than when it comes from somebody else. But
Did you participate in any military operations, including like combat or peacekeeping operations?
when I was in Vietnam, as I had mentioned, well, when I was explaining before this about me writing the book about being an REMF, which was a category, because of the company I was in. I was with the 539th Transportation Company, and they were a general support company that we fixed helicopters, and if we couldn't fix them, they went to a junkyard. So that's what classified me. I was a mechanic and classified me, but I was on flight status, and I had regular flight physicals, and I was receiving flight pay, and I wanted to transfer out of the 539th and go to a combat company, and they kept telling me no. And I tried probably 50 times over the 15 months I was in Vietnam to get transferred. And they just, every time they said no. So I found out that on my days off, I could go down to the 128th Assault Helicopter Company and volunteer to fly combat missions as a door gunner. And so that's how I got involved with the combat missions. There weren't any specific designated combat assaults or anything like that, other than the Cambodia incursion. I was part of that.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it was, we were doing what they called ash and trash missions. We basically flew supplies from Tay Ninh into Cambodia, and then fly back and load the helicopter up, taking ammunition, water, food, whatever the troops needed when they were in Cambodia. And our last flight in, we landed, and they filled the helicopter up with enemy weapons and our own weapons, which the enemy was using against us. And it was part of the arms cache, which there was tons of ammunition and arms captured when we went into Cambodia. And when we flew back to Phu Loi, which was the base camp I was at, and landed, the pilots go, "Get what you want and get the hell out of here." And so I remember grabbing 3 or 4 9mm pistols and AK-47s and sniper rifles, and trying to run, carrying my helmet and my flight gear and all these weapons. I remember all my pockets were full of guns. And I got out of that area, and those were bartering tools to improve my life.
What was that like, having to barter?
It was fun. The guys at the big bases, the Air Force guys, they didn't come close to seeing what I saw, or the opportunity to be able to have an AK-47 or a Russian-made 9mm pistol. So when you go, "I've got this, I want that," they were usually really glad to give it up. I had an Air Force mattress, made my life more comfortable. Army mattresses are 4 inches thick, Air Force is 6 inches thick. You know, do the math. Eventually I had a window air conditioner, and I was the only enlisted person in the whole company with a window air conditioner. That created a lot of problems. I had my own refrigerator, had a black and white TV. Eventually I got my own room when I was changed from a Spec 5 to a sergeant. So if it was luxuries, then I had usually had what I had. And if the Army had something I wanted, I was a master thief at taking it from the Army. Would never steal from another GI, but if it was government property and it made my life better, I had it.
What was it like transitioning to Vietnam?
It was a scary thought. You fly in, you know, of course, in a passenger plane, jetliner, and they come in high, and all of a sudden you do this spiraling dive to the base, because Charlie, that's what we called our enemy, was out there taking pot shots at the airliners, hoping they could bring down an airliner of American GIs. And when you walk to the door, I think the first thing that hit me was the heat and the humidity. It was just a major shock to my body. Being raised here in California, you guys haven't a clue what humidity's like. And so when you first encounter it, it's really shocking. And the other thing was the stench, the foul, stinking air of Vietnam.
Why were the enemies called Charlies?
That was a nickname that somebody gave them before I got there. You had the Viet Cong, which were local guerrillas. There were Vietnamese that worked on our base during the day. We were almost positive that they were being friendly and smile at us. And at nighttime, they became VC and they were shooting at us. So it was that was one of the difficulties of the war, is when you're fighting somebody that they all look alike. You don't know who's the enemy and who's not the enemy.
Going back a little bit, can you explain the Jane Fonda experience?
Jane was a traitor. I guess that's the best way to put it. She went, I think 1972 was after I was out of the service. She went to North Vietnam, did a whole lot of pictures taken of her alongside anti-aircraft guns that shot down our fighter planes that came up there. And she degraded and dehumanized the POWs that were in North Vietnam. And she called them liars, and she called them traitors, and she called them warmongers and everything else. So she sided with North Vietnam, and she did it publicly.
How did that personally make you feel?
Pissed. I wasn't, and there isn't any. There's a lot of patches out there that says I'm not fond of Jane Fonda. I think I even have one of them.
How does that impact you and the other soldiers you were with at that time?
It's a slap in the face. I think we didn't really pay that much attention to it. We had a job to do, and we didn't. The military was really good about keeping the negative publicity away from us. We didn't. I knew there was protesting, but we didn't hear about Kent State or any of the other bad things.
Once you heard about Kent State, what make you feel?
I was upset about it. I couldn't believe that some idiot actually gave the soldiers live ammunition. I think that was the major fault in the whole thing. The protesters were horrible the way they treated the military, period. I mean, between the rocks and the bottles that they threw in Kent State, and the spitting and throwing feces and urine and everything else at the guys. And I could easily see how, you might get ticked off, but to shoot somebody, I didn't quite understand that.
Can you explain the Kent State?
Kent State?
Can you explain the Kent State shooting that happened?
It was a huge war protest. Kent State is near Akron, Ohio. I used to live right next to it, drove by it quite a few times. The war protesters had started several days of protesting there, and the governor called in the National Guard, and it's all history now.
Do you remember where you were when you found out about the Kent State shooting?
No, I don't. I believe I was in Vietnam at the time, but I don't remember the actual date.
Was the impact on you different than how it impacted some of the other soldiers you knew?
No, and I don't believe we really talked about it. Like I said, it was negative publicity that the military tried to keep away from us.
Mm-hmm. Did you like the fact that they tried to keep the negative publicity away?
Kept us focused on our jobs, kept us focused on what we were doing. I was a firm believer in that I had to have a clear mind, especially when I was flying door gunner in combat missions. I didn't want to have anything clouding my mind, like drugs or drinking or anything. I wanted to be sure that what I was doing right. When you come in and you're firing an M60 machine gun out the side of a helicopter, and you've got troops that jump out, you have to be sure that you don't end up shooting one of them. So, there's a lot to it.
Was there any other missions you participated in?
I've participated in quite a few. The Ash and Trash. There were CAs, is what they were called, combat assaults, that I participated in. We hauled ARVNs, which is the Republic of Vietnam Army, Army of the Republic of Vietnam. We hauled those guys in and out of the jungle or out wherever they wanted us to drop us. They were a huge problem in themselves. But, you know, you fly in to an LZ, a landing zone. You don't know whether it's hot, meaning there's people shooting at you, or whether it's cold, you're going to get in and out with not doing anything. So it's kind of a shock when you're sitting in the back of the helicopter and the pilots come on the radio and say full outside suppression, which means you start shooting your machine gun and you're shooting into the bushes and the trees where Charlie may be hiding. And so when that happens, you almost expect to see green tracers coming back at you, which are Russian-made bullets.
Was it hard just shooting randomly to see if you would hit anything?
No, I was too excited about shooting the machine gun. You know, would get a little overzealous sometime. We came into, well, we were doing a VR, a visual reconnaissance mission, and we found a bunker, and the pilot told me to go ahead and open up on the bunker. And to be honest with you, I'd still be sitting there shooting at it today if he hadn't told me to stop.
What were your emotions you were feeling during that?
I did something stupid when I was 14 years old. My parents didn't trust me to watch my sister. They were afraid I'd kill her. She was a horrible, horrible person. So they had to hire a babysitter to come over. Well, it was a teenage girl. I'm 14, and I hung around the girls. Well, one night, a bunch of girls came to the house and they brought a Ouija board. And they asked me if I wanted to ask a question, and I, of course, wanted to do it. I asked it what year I was going to die. It gave me a date. And it seemed realistic that that was possible. That date has not arrived yet, although it's rapidly approaching. So I've kind of had this invincible feeling about myself ever since then. I never really gave it much thought that I could have been blown up, become a paraplegic and stuck in a wheelchair, but still alive. But nevertheless, it always, when things got hot and bullets were flying everywhere, I didn't think about it. I just did my job.
How did you learn to trust the fellow soldiers you were with that you'd never known before you entered the war?
It's funny that, that question, because now I've done a lot of reading in the last couple of years, and there were so many fatalities from pilot error, from the crew not doing their job. And I never really realized at the time, here in Mr. Invincible, that all the pilot had to do was make one little mistake and we would have all crashed and burned, and maybe we would have survived and maybe we wouldn't have. So you become reliable and dependent upon them doing their job right. And to be honest with you, when I was flying combat missions, I don't think I really thought about what they were doing. I just knew that things were going to be all right. It wasn't my day.
Did you participate, out of the combats that you participated in, which one is the most memorable to you?
The most memorable one was we came into an LZ. It was hot, and like I said, you could see when we were coming in, the gunships came in ahead of us, and they were shooting rockets and miniguns into the LZ, and you could see the green tracers coming out of the tree line heading towards the Cobra gunships. And that was something I hadn't really seen before. And then as we got closer, all of a sudden you hear the plink, plink, plink as you hear the bullets hitting the helicopter I'm in. And the aircraft, I'm sitting in the right rear corner. I took 2 rounds just off my right shoulder that went underneath the transmission of the helicopter. And then I learned later that there were 3 more bullet holes farther in the tail boom. So it was kind of an eye-opener to look over and realize just how close. And when we left the LZ, as we were leaving, I was shooting the machine gun, and then I felt a sting in my left shoulder, and my hand hurt. And I looked down, and my hand was bleeding. And I kind of assessed what the damage was. It didn't seem to be that bad. I made a fist hoping I could stop it from bleeding, and I kept shooting the machine gun with my right hand. And when we got clear where we weren't being shot any longer, then I looked down and realized that I needed to apply pressure like this and pinch it shut, because I'd had a severe cut on between my index finger and my thumb. And the wound in my right shoulder just felt like a bee sting. It was a tiny flaming hot piece of metal that went in, didn't go in very deep, but it cauterized when it went in, so there wasn't a lot of blood there. I didn't tell anybody in the helicopter that I was wounded. They didn't know it until about 40 minutes later when we landed to refuel.
What were other injuries that you experienced throughout the war?
Oh, no combat injuries. We played volleyball every night, jungle rules. I broke a finger, and I couldn't report it because at that time they were issuing punishment to guys that were, because I'm government property. So when you break government property, then you're in trouble. So I just went around with a broken pinky finger.
Is there any other injuries that some of the people you were close to?
Well, there was one night at the 539th, we slept in rooms that usually had 3 to 4 guys in the room, and plywood walls separated all of us. And the guy on the other side of the wall, his feet were like that far from my head. A .45 caliber bullet came through the metal roof and hit him in the foot. That much more, right or left, I don't remember which way it would have probably hit me in the head. And he was wounded pretty severe. We couldn't figure out where the bullet came from. I mean, you hear about it now, people shooting guns in the air and the bullets falling and killing people, actually. So we kind of maybe assessed that's what happened. But it's one of those things you just go, another day, move on.
During your time at war, what do you think is one of the most scary moments that you were like, I'm not invincible?
Between that last, when I said about being shot at in the helicopter, that was a real eye-opener. There was one night when we were getting rocket attack on the base, and we all had to run out to secondary bunkers. And the bunkers were nasty smelling, they were hot, they were full of mosquitoes, and nobody wanted to go in them. So if you arrived there, first couple guys, you got to climb up on top and kind of be an observer. And when I stood up, I heard the sound of a bullet go by my head. It makes a crack sound since it's traveling faster than the speed of sound. Of course, it made me hit the dirt. And I was like, whoa. I mean, it was that close. So those were the 2 times that, I mean, I pulled security guard or perimeter guard for 60 days while I was in Vietnam. And because of the boredom of sitting on a bunker staring into the darkness all night long, you're tired, you want to go to sleep, but you can't. And you're just staring out there, wondering if somebody's coming in to try and kill you. You're not quite, you can't see that far. It's just really difficult. So that sometimes, especially the first few nights when I did my first bunker guard, it was scary. I don't think I blinked the first night. I was petrified. I was sure Charlie was coming through the wire at me.
Can you recount any individuals that were with you during that time that stand out more than others?
No, and unfortunately, that's the worst part of my memory so far. I can remember fine details about having a fight with a guy in the company, but I can't remember names. And we're slowly There's a Facebook page for Fuloy, and some of the guys, like the company clerk, I remember him. He's on that in the Facebook page. So we're sharing stories, we're sharing pictures. It's been pretty rewarding.
Is it hard looking back at all the pictures and listening to the stories?
The only hard part is looking in the mirror and seeing how old I am and how young I was in the photos. That's the hard part.
Can you think about any of the incidents that happened during your service that weren't funny at the time, but you look back now and laugh at?
Nah, there was a lot of stupid things I did. It's a wonder I'm alive. I mean, I played with C4 plastic explosive. I'd make little bombs and set them off and just then go out and look and see how big of a hole it blew in the ground. And if it wasn't big enough, I made a little bit bigger bomb. Just, you know, like I said, if the Army had toys, you know, when it comes to weapons or explosives or one bunker I sat on, the perimeter road was about 50 yards away from the back of the bunker. And there was what we called a butter bar. He's a second lieutenant. He's got a little gold bar. He's a brand new officer. Would park at the bunker 5 and walk up to bunker 6 to try and catch us sleeping, which I didn't sleep. But I didn't like being startled either. So I broke into an ammo container, took a whole bunch of trip flares, and wired all the trails coming up to the bunker. 2 o'clock in the morning, he came through, set the flare off, scared the hell out of him. Next thing I know, he's screaming and yelling at me. He's got me at attention, yelling at me, asking me what was I thinking. And when he walked away, being a smart mouth that I can be, I looked over at him and I told him, well, fine, next time I'll just shoot you first and then I'll ask you who you are. I told him, I said, it's not smart sneaking up on guards, because Charlie was capable of doing that.
Is there any advice you can give to people who are joining the Army, like now?
If you're stuck in a combat situation, do not become complacent. It is so easy to let your guard down, become complacent. I can't tell you how many thousands of times I probably was complacent while being on guard duty, screwing around.
After you left the war and came back home, what were some of the things you did first?
When I came home, my number one goal was to meet somebody and get married. While I was in the service, I had a girlfriend when I first went in named Martha. When I was in Germany, she wrote me a Dear John letter. So when I came home on leave, I didn't have a girlfriend. And I reconnected with a girl that I went to high school with. She became my girlfriend. About halfway through Vietnam, she wrote me a Dear John letter. So I received 2 Dear John letters, and when I came home, I was bound and determined I was going to meet somebody and get married.
When you came home, how long after you came back did you get married?
It was a couple of years.
Are you still with your wife now?
No. I have been rated at 60% PTSD, and that, which I didn't think I had at all, and this rating just came within the last 5 years. Had a lot of difficulties with work, keeping jobs. I didn't like the way you look, I told you, and usually that didn't go too well when you're telling your boss to go fly a kite. And then it just bounced around. I'm on my 3rd marriage right now, but it has lasted for 26 years.
Do you have any children?
I have a son.
How does he feel about knowing that you were in war?
He's proud of me.
How old is your son?
He's just, the 22nd of November, he turned 45.
How was it when you first came home? How was it adjusting to the new civilian life you had to be a part of?
Uncertainties about what to do. I knew I wanted to find meet somebody new. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to college. I didn't know if I wanted to where I wanted to work. The company I had worked for when I went in the service was obligated to give me my job back. And I inevitably went back to doing that. And then I went to a trade school to learn architecture.
Since you've been home, were there any of your fellow veterans that you've seen or got in touch with?
There was one of the guys I knew in Germany. He lives in Los Angeles. It was 78, 79. We were down in LA and I looked him up. And we had a great time together. He was a pretty cool guy. Alan in Montana, we've talked on the phone, we've emailed each other. I just recently went on a vacation up to Glacier National Park and he's a pilot, tried to get him to fly down, fly over and see me, but he was busy and couldn't do it.
When you came home, how was your family? How did they react to it?
My family was fine. They were excited to see me. It's funny, I wouldn't tell my parents when I was coming home because I had extended my tour of duty. Your tour of duty in Vietnam was 1 year, and I extended it because the Army offered me an early discharge if I came home with less than 6 months to serve. So I timed it to have 5 months and 27 days left on my agreement when I came home. And so they didn't know. They had put banners up on the garage door, "Welcome home, Richard," and they started doing that in October of 70. And I didn't come home till March 1st of 71. So they had changed the sign a few times.
When you came home, was your family proud of you?
Yeah, my dad was. They were a little upset with me for volunteering to go to Vietnam. They didn't know that I had volunteered until I was there. And then my uncle that lived in Alaska called and told them. My mom was too, but again, with the atmosphere and the conditions with the protesters and the negativity about the Vietnam War, almost all the vets just learned to clam up, shut up, don't say anything, just get on with your life. I couldn't wait to grow my hair out so that I wouldn't look like I had been in the service. I had accidentally, set a huge field and a jet fuel truck on fire. I ran in to put the fire out, realized that the truck could explode and I'd be little pieces of me everywhere. So I ran out, but then I remembered the truck was full and it's less likely to explode. So I ran back in again, put the fire out, yelled for the driver. He came out, jumped in the truck, and I chased the truck with a fire extinguisher because the nozzle kept bouncing on the ground, and every time it hit the ground, it would shoot fuel out and flames were following the truck. I collapsed, got weak-kneed and couldn't stand up anymore. And the guys came over and dragged me over out of the soot and ash and what little flames there were left. And there was one of our maintenance officers had observed the whole thing, and he was standing over me laughing. He told me that was the funniest thing he'd seen while he was in Vietnam, and I didn't think it was too funny. Well, I was home about 30 days. I was living with my parents' house, and 2 Army officers came to the door, asked for me. Of course, my mom went negative. She went in the backyard and said, "Hey, there's 2 Army guys out there that want to talk to you. What did you do?" Now I'm thinking, what did I do? Oh man, they've come to get me. I'm going back in. Oh no. I go to the door and they hand me the orders for an ARCOM, Army Accommodation Medal. This officer had put me in for the medal for putting the truck out. He thought I was that stupid. I should have just let it blown up.
For any out of the awards and medals, can you describe them and which ones?
The one I'm the most proud of, when I was wounded in the LZ in the hand and my right shoulder, I didn't push for a Purple Heart because there were guys that were losing their life. They were losing arm and leg. There were guys that were seriously wounded. And I felt like my minor wounds didn't really deserve a Purple Heart. So I never pursued it. And I just received it in '09 finally. I had to send back, I had received my medical records that had the document in there signed by a major that I was wounded by an enemy grenade. And I forwarded that to St. Louis. It took them nearly a year to do their investigation. And then in October of 2009, they mailed me the orders, certificate, and my Purple Heart.
Can you explain how you think war affects an individual?
A lot of talk about PTSD, but in all honesty, PTSD can occur to you. You could go through a traumatic experience and it can haunt you for the rest of your life. So war alone is bad enough, and depending on what you see, I had my first experience seeing somebody shot. I kind of went into a mild state of a coma because I couldn't believe what I had just seen. We flew in on many missions for resupply, ash and trash, and they'd load wounded South Vietnamese soldiers in the helicopter. And I didn't want to look at them, but I was always curious to see, what somebody looks like when they're all blown up or shot. And then there were a couple times when we went in and they put dead guys in the helicopter. And that was scary.
How do you think overall how war affects your life in a social and physical aspect?
When I first got out of the service, it didn't really affect me at all. Like I said, we had to just shut up, be quiet, don't talk about Vietnam, because you never knew who was going to thump you on the head and call you some horrible names. So we just ignored it. A lot of bad things. I know quite a few guys that they don't want to claim they're a Vietnam veteran right now. They saw far more than I did. They were maybe bothered with PTSD far worse than I am. So it affects all of us differently. It depends on what we saw. There were guys in the 539th which could have been me, that just got up every day, went through Army routines, went over, worked on a helicopter, went to chow at night, watched a movie and went to bed. That was their life for the 1 year.
How do you think war impacts society as a whole?
Well, it's not popular, of course. Nobody wants it. It's unfortunate that it has to happen. I think that, for me, it's frustrating. There were times in my life before you were born that I would sit there and go, okay, go nuke them. Just get rid of them. Eliminate the problem. But those were harsh, negative attitudes, and that's some of what war does to you, is that, line them up and shoot them. Get rid of the problem. I don't feel that way now. I think some of the wars that we've been involved in recently, we should not have been involved in. And so it's really hard for me to, you got people that say, well, how do you feel about Iraq? I wish we would have never gone there. I don't think we should have. That's my opinion. And then they go, well, that means you don't support the troops. And no, that's not what that means. It means I'm against the war in Iraq, but I support the guys that are there. I want them all to come home alive and well. So it's tough.
Do you think there's a cost of war?
One life lost is a major loss, a major cost. The Vietnam War was a huge loss. Over 58,000 died in Vietnam. And these, just like I said, one life, especially the way the war was fought. I hate the term that we lost the war, and it's been hard for me to accept that, and I don't completely accept it. And the way I look at it is, As an individual soldier, I didn't lose the war. Our government lost the war.
Do you think war, even with all this destruction it causes, do you think it could be beneficial?
I think in some cases it's a necessity. It's the only way something's going to be resolved. But there's so much politics involved in it. You know, we took out Saddam Hussein. A lot of people feel that maybe if he was still in power, there wouldn't be ISIS. So there's so many ifs. You know, what if we did this? What if we did that? Darned if we do, darned if we don't.
Earlier you mentioned that you were writing a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The book's titled Vietnam, REMF with a question mark, because I always questioned whether I was a rear-end mother blank. And then there's numbers on for the title, the 365 with a line through it, which was our one-year tour, and I was there 466 days. It starts out with me talking about my going into the Army. Prior to going in, things I went through just before induction, after I went through basic training, and stories keep popping in my head. I remembered another one last night, but I'm not going to add any more paragraphs or chapters to the book. But I basically follow my whole time through the military. Like I said, I had a love-hate relationship with military. After I was out for about 4 years, I ended up joining the Marine Reserves in Alameda, and I served as a helicopter crew member there. And the hate part came in again, and I got out, and a buddy of mine talked me into joining the National Guard in Santa Cruz, and that was a no-brainer because it was a childhood bucket list of being a tank commander. And so I joined a tank unit out of Santa Cruz, and because of my rank, I instantly became a tank commander and had 1 year of playing on tanks, is the way I look at it. It was a blast. And then it got the hate part of it again came in, and then I was too old and they wouldn't take me anymore.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we finish up?
No, I just want to thank you guys for what you're doing. I greatly appreciate your effort, and especially coming in on a non-school day and putting forth this effort.
Thank you for coming.